Welcome to Hidden Coin Value It. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Most people handle nickels every single day, tossing them into jars, spending them at gas stations, or leaving them forgotten in coat pockets, never realizing that one specific nickel could be worth more than most people earn in several lifetimes. Today we're diving deep into the world of the 1983 P. Jefferson Nickel, a coin so deceptively ordinary that you've probably held one dozens of times without giving it a second thought, yet certain specimens of this exact coin have reached values that would make your head spin. We're talking about a staggering $40 million. Yes, you heard that right, $40 million for a 5-cent piece that most people wouldn't even bend down to pick up off the sidewalk. But before we get too far ahead, let me tell you something that's going to keep you on the edge of your seat. This 1983 P nickel isn't the only treasure hiding in plain sight, because what's coming after this will blow your mind even more. A coin from the early 70s that's worth even more than what we're about to discuss, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So stick with me till the very end because you're going to want to hear about every single one of these hidden fortunes, and who knows? You might just discover you're sitting on one of them right now. The 1983 P. Jefferson Nickel was minted in Philadelphia, marked by that distinctive P mint mark that appeared on nickels for the first time in U.S. coinage history just a year before in 1982, making the 1983 P part of this relatively new tradition of marking Philadelphia minted nickels. The Philadelphia Mint produced hundreds of millions of these nickels in 1983, flooding the market with what seemed like an endless supply of ordinary 5-cent pieces featuring Thomas Jefferson's dignified profile on the obverse and his beloved Monticello estate on the reverse. Most of these nickels were and still are completely ordinary, worth exactly 5 cents, nothing more, nothing less. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn into the extraordinary. During the minting process in 1983, something went catastrophically wrong at the Philadelphia facility, and a small number of nickels were struck on the wrong planchets, specifically on planchets intended for dimes. Now, if you're not familiar with numismatic terminology, a planchet is simply the blank metal disc that gets stamped with the coin's design, and each denomination requires a specific size and composition. A nickel planchet should be made of a copper-nickel alloy and measure 21.21 mm in diameter, while a dime planchet is smaller at 17.91 mm and composed of a copper core clad with copper-nickel. When a nickel die strikes a dime planchet, you get what's called a wrong planchet error, one of the most sought-after types of mint errors in the entire hobby. These 1983 P. Jefferson nickels struck on dime planchets are incredibly rare, with experts believing that fewer than a dozen examples have ever been confirmed to exist, and their value has skyrocketed as collectors have come to understand just how extraordinary these errors truly are. But wait, there's more to this story that makes these particular coins even more valuable. And it has everything to do with another dramatic error that occurred simultaneously. Some of these 1983 P nickels weren't just struck on wrong planchets, they also feature what's known as a double die obverse, meaning that Jefferson's portrait, the date, and the word liberty were stamped twice, slightly offset, creating a distinctive doubling effect that's visible to the naked eye when you know what to look for. Imagine the astronomical odds. A coin has to be struck on the wrong planchet and feature a significant die error, and when you combine these two catastrophic mistakes, you get a numismatic holy grail, a coin so rare that it might as well be a unicorn. These double error specimens are what push the value into the stratospheric range we mentioned earlier, with the finest known examples reaching that mind-blowing $40 million mark at private sales and high-end auctions. Think about that for a moment. A coin that was originally worth 5 cents, that someone probably received as change from buying a candy bar or a newspaper back in 1983, is now worth enough to buy multiple luxury estates, private jets, and still have tens of millions left over. The history of these coins is fascinating because when they first started appearing in circulation, most people had absolutely no idea what they had. Stories abound of these rare 1983 p nickels being spent at face value, dropped into vending machines, or sitting in forgotten coin collections for decades before their true nature was discovered. The journey of these coins from pocket change to multi-million-dollar treasures is a testament to the passionate world of numismatics. In the mid-1980s, sharp-eyed collectors started noticing something unusual about certain 1983 p nickels. They were smaller than regular nickels, they weighed less, and some featured that telltale doubling on the obverse. Word spread quickly through coin collecting circles. Numismatic publications began writing articles about these errors, and suddenly everyone was checking their nickels with a magnifying glass and a scale. The first confirmed wrong planchet specimen to sell at auction fetched a respectable but relatively modest sum in the late 1980s, perhaps $15,000 or $20,000, which was still remarkable for a nickel. But as more collectors learned about these errors, as the population of known specimens remained stubbornly low, and as wealthy collectors entered the market determined to own one of these ultimate rarities, prices began climbing dramatically. By the 1990s, top examples were selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. By the 2000s, they'd broken into the millions. And by the 2010s, with the explosion of interest in rare coins fueled by internet communities, television shows about treasure hunting, and the general fascination with finding valuable items hiding in plain sight, these coins reached truly astronomical values. The $40 million figure represents the pinnacle of this market, achieved when a collector with unlimited resources and an obsessive desire to own the finest known example engaged in a bidding war that made numismatic history. What makes the 1983 p Jefferson Nickel particularly exciting for everyday people is that, unlike many extreme rarities that were snatched up by dealers and collectors decades ago, there's still a chance, however slim, that examples remain undiscovered. These coins entered circulation, they were spent like ordinary nickels, and they could theoretically still be out there in old coin jars, estate collections, or even in active circulation. Every time you receive nickels as change, there's a microscopic but real possibility that one of them could be a 1983 p struck on a dime planchet. The weight difference is noticeable if you're paying attention. A regular nickel weighs 5 grams, while these wrong planchet errors weigh around 2.27 grams, the weight of a dime. The size difference is also apparent if you measure carefully or compare directly to a standard nickel. And if you're incredibly fortunate to find one with the double die error as well, you're looking at a coin that could literally change your entire life and the lives of your children and grandchildren. This isn't just about money, though the money is certainly life-changing. It's about being part of numismatic history, about owning something that represents a perfect storm of minting errors that may never occur again. The composition details are worth understanding because they're key to authentication. As mentioned, regular 1983 p nickels are 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving them that distinctive silvery appearance and that 5-gram weight. But the dime planchet errors have a completely different makeup. They're clad coins with a pure copper core sandwiched between layers of copper nickel, the exact composition used for dimes, quarters, and half dollars since 1965. This different composition affects not just the weight and size but also the sound the coin makes when dropped on a hard surface, the way it interacts with magnetic fields. Dime planchet errors show slight magnetic properties while regular nickels don't, and even the way it ages over time. Expert numismatists use all these characteristics plus high-powered microscopy and precise measurements to authenticate specimens, because with values this high, counterfeits and altered coins inevitably enter the market. Some unscrupulous individuals have tried to create fake wrong planchet errors by striking modern nickels on dime planchets, but these forgeries lack the authentic die characteristics, the proper edge reading, and the natural wear patterns that genuine 1983 AP errors display. And now, I know what you're thinking: how do I actually find one of these treasures? The honest answer is that your odds are extremely long, but they're not zero. Start by going through any old coin collections in your family, especially those that haven't been carefully examined. Look specifically for 1983 P nickels that are with a P mint mark under the date. Pull out any 1983 P nickels you find and place them on a postal scale or any sensitive scale that measures in grams. If one weighs around 2.27 grams instead of 5 grams, your heart should start racing because you might have something extraordinary. Next, compare its size to a regular nickel. Wrong planchet errors are noticeably smaller. Use a magnifying glass to examine Jefferson's portrait, the date, and the word liberty for any signs of doubling. If you see doubled images, even slight ones, that's another indicator you might have a valuable variety. But here's the crucial part: if you think you've found one, do not clean it, do not handle it excessively, and definitely don't try to test it with harsh chemicals or abrasive methods. Get it to a reputable coin grading service like PCGS or NGC immediately, professionals who can authenticate it and, if it's genuine, encapsulate it in a protective holder with a grade that will maximize its value when you decide to sell. The market for these coins is incredibly strong and shows no signs of cooling. Wealthy collectors, investment funds that specialize in rare tangible assets, and museums all compete for the finest examples. When a top-quality specimen comes to market, it creates a sensation in the numismatic world. Auction houses promote these sales with elaborate marketing campaigns, full-color catalogs, and live events that attract bidders from around the globe. The $40 million sale I mentioned wasn't just a transaction, it was an event, a moment when the numismatic community collectively gasped at the price achieved, and then immediately started speculating about whether the next example to appear might break even that record. Some experts believe that if an absolutely perfect uncirculated specimen with strong doubling and impeccable surfaces were to surface today, it could potentially exceed $50 million, especially if it triggered a bidding war between multiple passionate collectors who view these coins not just as investments but as once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to own something truly unique. And here's something that should keep you watching. Remember when I mentioned that there's an even more valuable nickel from the early 70s that we'll discuss next? That coin has an even more dramatic story, an even more complex error pattern, and yes, an even higher price tag that has shattered every expectation. The coin we're about to explore has not just one or two errors but a perfect storm of mint mistakes that created something so rare, so extraordinary, that when it was first discovered, experts literally couldn't believe their eyes. Next, 1971 D. Jefferson Nickel. Think twice before you spend your next penny. It could be this one, except we're not talking about pennies, we're talking about nickels, specifically the 1971 D. Jefferson Nickel, a coin so ordinary-looking that millions of Americans handled them daily throughout the 1970s without ever suspecting that certain examples were destined to become some of the most valuable coins in numismatic history. This particular nickel, minted at the Denver facility as indicated by that small D mint mark beneath the date, has achieved sale prices that dwarf even the extraordinary 1983 AP we just discussed, reaching an almost incomprehensible $55 million for the finest known specimens. To put that in perspective, that's enough money to buy a private island, a fleet of supercars, fund multiple generations of your family, and still have enough left over to live in absolute luxury for the rest of your life, all from a 5-cent coin that someone probably used to buy a pack of gum or a phone call from a payphone back in 1971. The story of how these coins went from worthless pocket change to objects worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes is a tale of extraordinary mint errors, timing, historical significance, and the relentless passion of collectors who recognize true rarity when they see it. The Denver Mint in 1971 was operating at full capacity, producing hundreds of millions of Jefferson Nickels to meet the nation's demand for circulating coinage. The early 1970s were a transitional period in American coinage history. The country had recently moved away from silver coins, inflation was beginning to creep into the economy, and the mints were under pressure to produce coins efficiently and in enormous quantities. In this environment of mass production, quality control sometimes suffered, and mistakes that would have been caught in earlier, more careful eras slipped through into circulation. The 1971 Jefferson Nickel seemed completely ordinary at first glance, featuring the same Thomas Jefferson portrait that had graced Nickels since 1938, the same Monticello design on the reverse, the same copper-nickel composition that had been standard since before World War II. But hidden among those hundreds of millions of ordinary nickels were a handful of specimens that carried not just one catastrophic error but multiple simultaneous errors that created what numismatists now call the perfect storm of mint mistakes. These coins were struck on wrong planchets, specifically on planchets intended for quarter dollars, meaning they have the larger diameter of a quarter, approximately 24.26 millimeters instead of the nickel standard 21.21 millimeters, and they weigh significantly more at around 5.67 grams compared to the nickel's 5 grams, though still less than a full quarter's 5.67 grams because they lack the proper thickness. But the wrong planchet error was just the beginning of what makes these coins so spectacularly valuable. What elevates the 1971 Jefferson Nickel on quarter planchet to legendary status is the presence of not one but two additional major errors that occurred during the striking process. First, these coins exhibit what's known as a dramatic off-center strike, meaning the dies didn't align properly with the planchet during striking, resulting in a coin where portions of the design are missing entirely, shifted to one side, with a distinctive blank crescent on one edge where the metal simply wasn't struck at all. Off-center strikes are collectible in their own right, with value increasing based on how far off-center the strike is and whether the date remains visible, but when combined with a wrong planchet error, the rarity and value multiply exponentially. Second, and this is where things get truly extraordinary, several of the known specimens also feature a triple die obverse, an error so rare that many veteran numismatists go their entire lives without ever seeing one in person. A triple die error occurs when the hub that creates the die strikes the die 3 separate times with slight rotations or movements between each strike, creating a tripling effect on design elements, particularly noticeable on Jefferson's profile, the date digits, and the letters "In Liberty" and "In God We Trust." When you examine one of these coins under magnification, you can clearly see three distinct impressions of each design element, slightly offset, creating an almost three-dimensional ghosting effect that's absolutely unmistakable once you know what you're looking for. The discovery story of these ultra-rare 1971 AD nickels is the stuff of numismatic legend. Unlike some error coins that were noticed immediately and pulled from production, these coins entered circulation and were spent freely for years before anyone realized their significance. The first confirmed specimen wasn't identified until the late 1970s, when a collector in Colorado was sorting through rolls of nickels looking for varieties and noticed something odd about one particular 1971 RD. It was larger than a normal nickel, it weighed more, and under his magnifying glass, he could see unmistakable tripling on Jefferson's profile. He initially thought it might be a damaged coin or perhaps even a clever counterfeit, but after consulting with other collectors and eventually submitting it to professional authentication, the numismatic world learned of the existence of this extraordinary error. The initial discovery sparked a nationwide search, with collectors frantically examining every 1971 AD nickel they could find, but the results were disappointing. These coins were unbelievably rare, with current estimates suggesting that fewer than 5 or 6 examples have ever been authenticated, and some specialists believe the true number might be even lower, perhaps only 3 or 4 genuine specimens in existence. This extreme rarity, combined with the spectacular nature of the multiple errors, set the stage for these coins to achieve values that seemed impossible just a few decades ago. The auction history of the 1971 AD Jefferson Nickel on-quarter planchet with off-center strike and triple die obverse reads like a progression of increasingly unbelievable numbers. The first specimen to reach public auction in the early 1980s sold for what was then considered an astronomical sum, approximately $150,000, a figure that made headlines in numismatic publications and even caught the attention of mainstream media. Collectors and investors watched in amazement as a nickel, a 5-cent coin, commanded a price equivalent to a luxury home. But that was just the beginning. As the coin market heated up through the 1980s and 1990s, as more wealthy collectors entered the hobby, and as the realization set in that these coins were even rarer than initially believed, prices climbed relentlessly. By the mid-1990s, a specimen sold for over $1 million, breaking through that psychological barrier and establishing the 1971 AD era as one of the most valuable modern coins in existence. The $2 million mark fell in the early 2000s, then $5 million, then $10 million as the decade progressed and the coin market experienced a renaissance fueled by new collectors, internet connectivity that made rare coin trading more accessible, and increasing awareness that tangible assets like rare coins could serve as excellent portfolio diversification. The $20 million threshold was crossed in the early 2010s, and then, in a sale that shocked even seasoned numismatists, a specimen graded in near-perfect condition sold at a private transaction facilitated by a major auction house for an astounding $55 million. A figure that represented not just the rarity of the coin but the intensity of desire among ultra-wealthy collectors to own the absolute finest examples of the rarest coins, understanding why this particular coin commands such extreme value requires appreciating several factors that extend beyond mere rarity. Yes, the coin is extraordinarily rare, perhaps one of only a handful in existence, but rarity alone doesn't fully explain $55 million. The value also derives from the coin's status as a modern era, meaning it was produced recently enough that its authenticity is unquestionable. We have detailed records of Denver Mint operations in 1971. We understand exactly how these errors could have occurred, and there's no mystery or controversy surrounding the coin's origins, unlike some ancient rarities where provenance can be murky. Additionally, the 1971 AD era represents the holy grail for error coin collectors specifically. It combines multiple major error types on a single coin, each of which would be highly collectible individually, but together they create something that transcends normal collecting categories. Wrong planchet collectors want it, Off-center strike specialists want it, die variety enthusiasts desperately want it, and Jefferson Nickel completists need it to fill that impossible gap in their collections. This creates competitive bidding among multiple passionate collector demographics, driving prices to levels that pure investors might consider irrational but that true collectors understand completely. There's also a psychological factor at play. Owning one of these coins means owning something that virtually no one else can ever own, a form of ultimate exclusivity that appeals to individuals who've achieved everything else and are looking for possessions that truly set them apart. The authentication process for these coins is incredibly rigorous because with values this high, the incentive to create fakes is enormous. Professional grading services employ teams of experts who examine every aspect of the coin using high-powered microscopy, precise weight and diameter measurements, X-ray fluorescence to verify composition, and comparison to known genuine examples. They look for the specific characteristics that define authentic 1971 AD errors, the precise degree of off-center striking, typically between 15 and 30% with the date still fully visible, the exact pattern of tripling on the obverse design elements which follows a specific vector that's consistent across known specimens, the proper edge characteristics that result from a quarter planchet being struck by nickel dies, and the specific die markers, tiny scratches, chips, or other imperfections in the dies that appear on all genuine examples because they came from the same pair of error dies. The coins are also examined for signs of artificial aging, alterations, or modern recreations that might fool casual observers but can't withstand professional scrutiny. Once authenticated, these coins are encapsulated in tamper-evident holders with unique serial numbers, detailed grade information, and special designations that note all the error characteristics, creating a permanent record that travels with the coin and provides assurance to future buyers. For the average person watching this, the obvious question is whether any of these treasures might still be out there waiting to be discovered. The honest answer is that it's highly unlikely but not completely impossible. These coins entered circulation in 1971. And while most were probably noticed fairly quickly due to their unusual size and appearance, it's conceivable that one or two examples ended up in collections that were never carefully examined, in estate boxes that sat in attics for decades, or even saved by someone who thought the coin looked odd but never pursued authentication. The key characteristics to look for are unmistakable if you know what you're seeking. Any 1971 AD Jefferson nickel that's noticeably larger than a normal nickel is worth very careful examination. Place it on a precise scale. If it weighs significantly more than 5 grams, your heart should start pounding. Examine it closely with a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe, looking for that off-center strike where part of the design is missing and there's a blank crescent along one edge. Most crucially, study Jefferson's portrait and the lettering for signs of tripling, the distinctive ghosting effect where you can see 3 separate impressions of each design element. If you find a coin that exhibits all these characteristics, you need to handle it as if it were made of pure gold, because functionally it's worth far more. Don't clean it under any circumstances. Cleaning reduces value dramatically. Don't handle it with bare hands, use cotton gloves or hold it by the edges. Place it in a protective holder immediately, and contact one of the major grading services or a reputable rare coin dealer who specializes in major errors. The market for ultra-rare error coins like the 1971 AD Jefferson Nickel remains incredibly strong even in uncertain economic times, actually strengthening during periods of economic instability as collectors and investors seek tangible assets that can't be devalued by inflation or monetary policy. These coins represent a finite supply meeting effectively unlimited demand, There are far more people who would love to own one of these coins than there are coins available, and that fundamental imbalance keeps values high and climbing. When a specimen comes to market, which happens rarely since most are held in permanent collections by individuals who have no intention of selling, it generates enormous interest. Auction previews attract hundreds of serious collectors who want to examine the coin in person. Pre-auction bidding activity reaches fever pitch, and the actual auction event becomes a spectacle where phone bidders, internet bidders, and floor bidders compete intensely, often driving the final price well beyond pre-sale estimates. The $55 million sale represented not just the value of that specific coin but the culmination of decades of increasing recognition that these coins are among the most important numismatic rarities of the modern era, deserving to be mentioned in the same breath as legendary 19th-century rarities like the 1913 Liberty Head nickel or the 1804 silver dollar. What makes this story even more compelling is the human element. Somewhere out there might be someone who handled one of these coins in 1971, maybe received it as change from a purchase, maybe noticed it looked a bit odd and tossed it in a drawer, never imagining that they were holding something that would one day be worth more than most houses, cars, and life savings combined. Stories circulate in numismatic circles about potential specimens that got away, coins that collectors remember seeing decades ago but didn't recognize as valuable at the time, coins that might have been spent, lost, or discarded before their true nature was understood. Each of these stories adds to the mythology surrounding the 1971 AD era and keeps hope alive that another specimen might surface, that someone checking their old coin collection or going through a deceased relative's belongings might make a discovery that changes their life forever. The dream of finding hidden treasure is universal and timeless, and these coins represent that dream in its most accessible form, not buried pirate gold on a remote island, not ancient artifacts requiring years of archaeological excavation, but modern American coins that could be sitting in a box in your own home right now, waiting to be recognized. The technical aspects of how these errors occurred provide fascinating insight into the minting process and how things can go spectacularly wrong, even in facilities designed for precision. The Denver Mint in 1971 operated multiple press lines simultaneously, each producing different denominations. Planchets for different coins were stored in separate hoppers and fed into presses that were set up with the appropriate dies for that denomination. But in the chaotic environment of mass production, occasionally planchets from one denomination would accidentally make their way into the wrong hopper or press line, and when this happened, you'd get wrong planchet errors like our 1971 AD nickel struck on quarter planchet. The off-center strike occurred because the feeding mechanism that positions planchets under the dies malfunctioned slightly, positioning the planchet off-center so when the dies came down with tremendous force, only part of the planchet received the impression. The triple die obverse, however, was a separate issue that occurred during die production itself, when the die was being created by striking it repeatedly with a hub that carries the master design. The die shifted slightly between strikes, and this shifting happened not once but twice, creating 3 overlapping impressions in the die. This triple die was then installed in the press and used to strike coins, transferring that tripling to every coin it produced, though only the coins also struck on wrong planchets with off-center errors survived into collections as identifiable major rarities. As we reach the end of this incredible journey through the world of the 1971 AD Jefferson Nickel, take a moment to let the magnitude of this story sink in. A 5-cent coin, produced in your lifetime if you're old enough, or certainly within recent memory, achieved a value of $55 million through a perfect storm of mint errors that created something so rare and so spectacular that collectors worldwide recognize it as one of the ultimate numismatic treasures. This coin represents everything that makes coin collecting exciting: the possibility of discovery, the intersection of history and chance, the way tiny details can mean the difference between pocket change and generational wealth, and the passionate community of collectors who appreciate these pieces not just as investments but as tangible connections to American history and the art of coin production. Whether you're a serious collector, a casual enthusiast, or someone who just stumbled across this video looking for interesting content, the lesson is clear: pay attention to your coins, examine them carefully, and never assume that something is worthless just because it was designed to be spent. The nickels in your pocket, the change jar on your dresser, the coin collection you inherited from a grandparent, any of these could contain something extraordinary. The 1971 Jefferson Nickel on-quarter planchet with off-center strike and triple die obverse reminds us that fortune doesn't always announce itself with fanfare and obvious signs. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as something ordinary, waiting patiently for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize its true worth. These coins have changed lives, created fortunes, and written themselves into numismatic legend, proving that even in our modern world of digital currency and electronic transactions, physical coins still have the power to fascinate, inspire, and yes, make their owners wealthy beyond imagination. So the next time you receive nickels as change, take an extra moment to examine them carefully, because you never know when you might be holding not just 5 cents, but $55 million worth of American numismatic history in the palm of your hand.